Hello, my name is Mike McKee, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about batch macros. This is the third part of the series and the last type of macro that Alteryx offers. We did our first course on standard macros, our second course on iterative macros. If you have any questions about that, like to learn those, feel free to look up those courses. Today we're going to talk about the batch macros. Now, what a batch macro allows you to do, it allows you to take rows of data in and do the exact same processing for each row of data and then output everything unioned together. All right, so to illustrate this a little bit, I have a directory tool that we talked about in the intermediate tools course. And you can see that I have a variety of files coming in here, right? It's pulling in 3 Excel files, a CSV, and a second Excel file down here. Now, what the batch macro will allow you to do is pull each one of these Excel files, enumerate them so we get all the data, union them together, and then ship them out. Now, in the intermediate tools course, we looked at the dynamic input, and the dynamic input allows you to do something very similar. But where the batch macro really excels, at least in this particular example, is if you have different schemas on your Excel files or whatever file it happens to be. If it's the same schema, I'd go ahead and probably use the dynamic input and be done with it. But if they have different schemas, and oftentimes what we see is when you get extracts from a database or an online a repository or something like that, they'll often have nulls or completely blank columns or a variety of artifacts in them that make it appear to have a different schema even though it looks like it's all the same. And oftentimes that will hinder the dynamic input tool. And so I think it's a little bit better and easier to use this tool. Well, a little bit better to use this tool because it's a little bit more adaptable to differing situations. All right, as with some of my other courses, there is a zip file attached to it. The zip file actually has two different folders in it. Um, Today we're going to be talking about bringing in multiple files, probably one of the more common use cases that I see for batch macros. In that folder, we've got just a template that I threw in there. I've got a folder that has some Excel and then a subfolder that's got a CSV and another Excel in there. Um, I've got my start file that we're working with here. Double click that or go to File, Open. Here is the finished product. And of course, there are the two macros that we're going to go ahead and build today. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to uncheck include subdirectories, and I'm just going to get all the files. We'll play with this a little bit at the end. I'm going to run that. And as you can see, I've got those just 3 Excel files, simple and easy. Right? The 3 Excel files aren't all that exciting, but you'll see what they are at the end there. Okay, now this one's a little bit different, and I'm not going to go ahead like I have in the others and duplicated this workflow. Okay, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and start a new workflow. So let me go ahead and start the new workflow. Now, for this workflow, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, what is the first thing that I'm going to need to do here? Okay, all right. So the first thing that I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to bring in and get the sheet information. Okay, so let me go ahead and drag an input tool in. And I'm going to build the basic workflow first. For this input tool, I'm going to configure it slightly differently than I have in the past. I'm going to go ahead and set up a connection, go to Files, select a file, and I'm going to go into my directory here and get the Excel spreadsheets, and I'm just going to grab the first one. Now, one of the differences I'm going to do in this particular macro is that instead of grabbing one of the tabs, I'm going to grab the sheets. Go OK and run that. And it enumerates the tabs that are in the spreadsheet. I got 4 tabs in that particular spreadsheet. Okay. Now, in addition to that, I'm also going to want to open this up, and I'm going to go ahead and grab the full path. Right? And the full path will allow me to go ahead and get the location of the file as well. Note that at the end of the full path, and this is similar to what we did with the dynamic input tool, list of sheet names as opposed to the tab, and we're going to go ahead and put that on the end there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to preparation, grab a formula tool. In that formula tool, I'm going to create a column. And that column, I'm going to go ahead and add full path sheets. Okay. Now, with full path sheets, I'm going to go ahead and build it. So I'm going to say, okay, let's replace. And what I want to replace is I want to replace the file name. And what I want to replace in this, and you guys should recognize this from the advanced tools. I'm going to grab the name right there without those pipes. And that's going to be my target. All right, list of sheet names. And then the replacement is going to be sheet names. Okay. VW string is just fine. I run that. Pretty straightforward so far. I've just created the files that I want to pull. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab a select tool and drag that down. Okay. And with the select tool, what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncheck sheet names and file names because the only thing that I need out of here is the full path. Okay, and then I'm going to run that. Now, this is just a workflow that pulls in a file, enumerates the sheets, and gives me the output. Right? So, in order to make this a batch macro, what I'm going to need to do is go up to my interface tools, and I'm going to go ahead and drag down first a macro output. Right? And so this is going to be sending my information out. Macro output, I'll go ahead and give an anchor abbreviation as O, output. Now, one of the things that defines a batch macro, because if we click on the white spot of the canvas and look at workflow, it's a standard macro right now. But if I drag down a control parameter, and a control parameter is what defines the macro, or sorry, the batch macro. I drag that down, and now you can see the workflow is a batch macro. Now, what this control parameter is going to do is this is going to be feeding in the data one row at a time. Okay? And then launching the entire workflow based upon that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to connect this to the lightning bolt, which gives me the action tool in there. For the action tool, I'm going to configure that so that I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to replace a specific string in here. So there is my specific string. Right? I'm replacing the entire list right there. But what I want to do is when I replace it, I'm only going to replace the name of the file and not the list of sheet names. Because the list of sheet names is going to come from this tool right here, defining what it's going to get. Right? Because if we look at this tool right here, you'll see that it's going to be replacing this file right here, and then it's going to add the list of sheet names to it. All right. So I can go ahead and I can name this if I wanted to. We'll go ahead and name this file path. Now I can run this because I don't really have a direct input to it all I have is a control parameter. Now you could certainly put an input to it, and then it would bring in the data, and then depending upon whatever treatment you put in here, it would do that to all the data, and then it would bring in the second treatment, do that to all the data, bring in the third treatment, do that to all the data, etc. So let me go ahead and save this. And I'm going to go ahead and save it here. Well, new, call it retrieve sheets. And I'm going to save that. Okay. So I come back to our main workflow. I go ahead and insert, go down to macros, retrieve sheets, and hook that up. Okay. Now, one of the things I'd like to point out is that we haven't done anything on Interface Designer yet. Okay, so nothing on the Interface Designer. Now, with the control input, you can see it's a little upside down question mark there, right? That defines the control parameter. You have to choose what the control parameter is going to be inputting. All right, so let me go ahead and select my full path and run that. And what you can see on the output here is it has brought in spreadsheet 1, tabs 1 through 4, spreadsheet 2, tabs 1 through 4, and then spreadsheet 3, tabs 1 through 4. So it's brought in all of those files, simple and easy. Right? Now, there's a lot of different ways we could have done this. I didn't necessarily have to do this with a batch macro. I could have just used the asterisk here or something like that. But this, it doesn't matter what's in the folder. Um, and it's just a really easy way that makes it very, very dynamic. All right, so first part of the batch macro is done here. Okay. Now, what do I want to do next? So the next thing is I actually need to enumerate all these files. And that's the key part. So let's go ahead and let's open a new file here, or a new workflow. Let's go ahead and we're going to bring in some data. Now, this is going to be just a little bit different because now we're going to actually be trying to gather all the information in the file. So I'm going to set up a connection, go to Files, select a file, and I'm going to go ahead and go up one because I like to go to that template also. I have noticed that sometimes if you're not using a template and this file disappears, sometimes it can wreak a little bit of havoc with the macro. So I tend to just leave that there. I'm going to open that. Tab 3 is fine. I also recommend making this relative. So I'm going to go ahead and run it this way. Right, now, I will have to save this before this will work. So I'm going to go ahead so I can save it as a macro, batch macro, drag a control parameter down. I'm not going to hook it up yet. I'm just going to drag it down. But that makes this now a batch macro. So I'm going to go ahead and do a save. And let's go ahead and save that here. And we're going to call this bring in data. And save that. Right. Now I can run this. And since this is relative to where the macro has saved, this runs just fine. Okay. All right. Now, this is just bringing in the data, right? You can see it's got 3 fields in it. I enumerated these so that I've got, the first Excel file, the tab that we're looking at, and then record 1 through 5. So if we were looking at a different tab, you'll see the different tab. If we're looking at a different field, 1, 2, 3, different file, 1, 2, 3, right? So pretty straightforward. Okay. Now we're going to need a macro output, kind of our standard stuff, and I want to make that O. And then I'm going to go ahead and connect this to our file here. And I'm going to do something similar to what I did before. Now, before when I was setting this up, I went ahead and said, okay, here's my value. And I'm going to go ahead and do everything except for the tab. But if you'll note, I'm already bringing in the tab here on the output. And this is something that we did in the first macro, so it's now with the tab attached. So I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to replace the entire string. Okay. Go up to the control macro. I always kind of want to name that just to make sure it makes sense. And I'm going to say qualified path. Okay. Now, we are going to need to go into the interface designer at this point because we do need to make some changes in here. Right? And these changes are important. Now, if you had more parameters, obviously you could change it up here. But what I'm looking for are the properties down here. Right? And in the properties down there, what's important is that auto configure by name. Okay, and this right here is the key. Now, I mean, you could do by position, but think of this as, it is a union tool. And think of this as that if you get different schemas, not all iterations will be the same, but you'll auto configure by name. And so it'd be like unioning different files with different columns and things like that. Okay? And this right here is kind of the key to getting this to work and be very dynamic, etc. All right. Let's go ahead and get rid of that. Okay. So I can run it. It runs just fine. I always want to run these things just to kind of test them out. We're going to save that configuration. Come back here, right click, come to the macro. And now we're going to be bringing in the data. And I'm going to hook that up. Note that I'm hooking the control parameter, that little upside down question mark, into the output of that. All right, so the output of this is just giving that full pile path sheets. The input of this, I'm going to want to change to that. Okay, and then when I run it, you'll note that it brings in all of the files. Right, I've got Excel file 1, fields 1 through 3. And then you'll note that Excel file 1 has a tab 4 that's got a field 4 and 5. And it brings those in no problems. Those tabs weren't, these fields weren't on the other tabs. So note that you get nulls where that didn't exist. But this is different schemas that it is bringing in. And if we further down, here's Excel file 2 and Excel file 3, and they're kind of the same. They have fields 6 and 7 that file 1 didn't have. I put everything on tab 4 just to be simple about it. So there's a variety of ways that we can do this, but this allows you to adapt to whatever schema changes are there. Right? Now, let's take this a step farther, and I'm going to include subdirectories, and I'm going to go ahead and look at only XLSX files and run that. And when I look at that, it brings in this new file, sales tax due, XLSX. And when I look at my output, I've now got that file in here. Now, none of the information from that file appeared in the top bunch of files. It only comes in down here. And then here's everything from that. It didn't exist in my first Excel file, so that's all null. But it does exist in all of these. So you can bring in as many files as you want with whatever schemas that you want and bring everything together. Right? The key is really going to be the configuration of you're bringing the data in, right? So if you do have to skip lines in the beginning, if maybe you want to go ahead and say let's pull in the file name or something like that. So it's however this is configured. So if I say I want to pull in the file name, and I go ahead and run that, now I've got a column with the file name. There's Excel 1, Excel 2, Excel 3, and then the sales tax due file. Now, if you have files that differ in type, so let's just say asterisk dot asterisk, and I'm going to run that. And you'll note that I now have a CSV file that came in. It's different from the Excel files. So this tool right here, it couldn't open it. Go to the messages here. It couldn't open this file, the CSV, because it's configured for an Excel file. So your schemas can be different, but it does have to be the same file type. Right? So I get rid of the subdirectories. And now I come back to that same file type. And it enumerates everything again. Right? So just be aware that when you build these things, it's going to be a couple of things. First, retrieve your sheets. And this will have to be, the same file type, but obviously you can put different things in there. You're also going to have the exact same file type here, but we can configure it to bring the files in a similar way. And then everything should come in nice and clean. One last thing I'd like to point out is that if we go into the bringing in the data macro and we go ahead and look at Interface Designer, one of the things that we changed in here is we did auto configure by name. I talked about how important that was. If I say all iterations will have the same schema, and I save that, and when I run it, I get an error because it's telling you it's finding different schemas between the different files. Now, if I come back in and I say, okay, I'm going to auto configure by position, and I think you guys know what's going to happen here. And I run that. Now it runs okay, and that's fine. But when I look at that, the fields get kind of messed up a little bit. Right? That field 6 and 7 don't really exist anymore. It just kind of gets stacked under the weird file name type stuff. Okay, so I think the best option is really to always auto configure by name, but just be aware that, if you're going to do positionally, that can work in some situations. So just kind of be aware of that. Now, the one thing I wanted to point out was that oftentimes when I set up a connection here, I will make it relative in this particular type of macro. Whoops. Let me get rid of this, the interface designer. I will make this relative to where the file is, and I had that temp file in there. It doesn't need to really have anything except for just be the same file type. And run that to make sure. Oh, since I changed this is now pointing to the wrong thing. So now I need to replace the specific string again. Oops, let me go off of it and back onto it. And so now I've changed that, replace the specific string, and I am just replacing the file itself. Run that. Well, I guess the macro's in a different spot. Anyway, um, we can go ahead and point to this. Let's see. Get this right for you. There's the file right there. Where did I save the... Ah, okay. It should be down one more level. So it is going to be here. I saved that at a higher level. So it's like that's where the macro is. And then run that. Awesome. And then I do the replacement. Off and then back on. And I want to replace everything except for the sheets. Sheet names. Oh, I don't have the sheet names coming in yet. There we go. Because change that around. Run that. All right, there we go. Now it's going cleanly. And I can go ahead and run it. So just kind of be aware of that. Making it relative can really help because then you just need to put that template file in the directory with the macro itself, and it never has to change, and it makes it simple and easy. And then you can just kind of move that around as a unit, and you're never going to have any problems. You can always come back in here and run things, because this is pointing to something that, you move it wherever you're going to go. As long as you don't change your directory structure, it's still going to move just fine. So, all right, I hope this was entertaining for you guys. I hope you guys learned how to build your first batch macro, and you could use this to go ahead and pull things in. One of the things I like about this particular structure is that you can bring in your sheets and then go ahead and run whatever analytics to pull the appropriate sheets or that you want to bring in. And then you can bring the individual tabs in. And then you could run analytics here to filter on the specific tabs that you're looking for. Maybe I only want tab 4 or something like that from these files. And then this will go ahead and pull all of that. So this gives you a lot of flexibility as to exactly what data you want to bring in and how you want to do it. I'm not a big PowerPoint guy, but I would like to show you a PowerPoint real quick and show you a little bit about another feature of the batch macro. All right. So the batch macro, when we're talking about grouping, and that'll be the next exercise that we're going to go through. Now, grouping the macro, you're going to have a data input now that we didn't have before. Prior, we just had the control parameter coming in and doing its thing. With the data input, it's going to group the data by a specific criteria and then feed that data through piece by piece based upon that criteria. Now, the example that we're going to do is state taxes, and then we're going to have transaction amounts from customers in states, and we need to figure out what the taxes are on this. So we build the macro, we turn it into a macro. Note that you've got the control parameter, which is the upside down question mark, and then an input and an output. We go ahead and throw the control parameter and the data into the appropriate anchors. And then non-grouped, so this is like we were running before. What it's going to do is it's going to pull in the data, and it's going to apply each row of data to every row of each row of the control data to every row of your input data. So functionally, you're going to have the first row of data applied to all 3 customers, the second row of your control data to all 3 customers, the third row of your control data to all 3 customers. You're going to get 9 rows out, which is going to be the 3 controls times the 3 customer data. Okay? And that's functionally what we just did. Okay, but we didn't have any data. Now, That's 3 batches, hence batch macro. Now let's talk about it grouped. Now, for grouping, what it's going to do is we're going to group on state in this situation. So it's going to say, okay, I'm going to run through this row of my control data, and I'm going to match it to every single California state. And then I'm going to run this through and match it, and this through and match it. So it brings in California. There's an implicit filter there. The filter only brings in California, and your first batch just matches California. Then it brings in Colorado, matches only Colorado, brings in Florida, and there are no matches for Florida, so it doesn't actually do anything with it. So your batch 1 and 2 have your matches, and there is no real batch 3. And so you can see it works in a very different way. Okay? And this is kind of what we're going to explore in our next example here. Let me go to File. I'm going to open a file, a workflow. We are in tax calculation now. And I'm going to go ahead and open my start file. And you'll notice in the start file that I've got my state tax information. And I went ahead and I put a data cleansing tool to replace the nulls with zeros so that, well, let me run it first, so that ultimately what I have here is I've got all numbers in here. If I look at my input, I've got the nulls. And math with nulls just doesn't work, so I change those to zeros. And then down here, I've got my customer spend, right, based upon states. Note that I got states here, state abbreviations, and I've got state abbreviations here. Okay. Now, in this case, I am going to duplicate this workflow. I'm going to go ahead and turn the state information into my input. Okay? Because that's what's going to be coming into the input. And the tax information is what's coming into my control. So let me right click this and convert that to a macro input. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. I'm not going to need it for now. I'm going to go ahead and go to preparation and drag a formula tool down because I'm going to do the calculations with it. Go to interface, and I'm going to pull down a control parameter. And note that the control parameter, if we click on the white spot of the canvas, is what turns it into the batch macro. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Let's come down to the new volume. And we're going to go ahead and save this as tax. Now, I'm going to do this a little bit differently this time to illustrate a different way of approaching these things. Now, one of the things that I did in this particular situation, or in all my situations before, is I went ahead and I connected the magnifying glass to the lightning bolt to put the action tool in. But I'd like to illustrate just going straight in and not actually even using an action tool. I like the action tool because it really allows you to kind of dig in there and see what's going on. However, in this particular situation, I'm not going to do that so that you can kind of see the difference. Now, when I come down to my formula tool here, let me go ahead and run it to bring the data in. I have all my customer information and their spend. My control parameter, if I come back to this right here, is what's going to have my tax rate information. Okay. So, what I'm going to do is from a mathematical standpoint, and one thing to note is that my tax information here, when I look at my metadata, is a double. But it might come through as a variety of things. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select a column. And I'm going to call it tax rate percent. Right? Because all of those were numbers. So I can go to my X, and here is the for my questions, and I'm going to select that, and I'm going to divide that by 100. Right? Note that there's a null here because there is nothing there. When I go to my control parameter here, I am still going to name that, and I'm going to call that state tax. State tax rate. Okay. Now, obviously, I don't want that to be a string, so I'm going to make that a double. And then I'm going to add another column here, which is going to be state tax spend. Now, for state tax spend, what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the spend times my tax rate percentage that I just calculated up there. Now, obviously, I could have done this in a single formula. I'm just kind of breaking this out to make it a little bit easier to understand. Now, it gives me an error here saying it's trying to apply a numeratic to a string value because this is coming in as a string. So I do need to do a 2 number here. And run that. And now it runs okay. And this is some of the challenges you get when you're not replacing something but going directly here. And then I'm going to go ahead and drag in a macro output and output that. Okay. And for the output, I'll call this output. And I'm going to save that. Now I come back to my batch macro here. I right click, insert, and I have tax now. Now we have the same things. My control parameter, I wanted to have with the states. And my data, I wanted to come in on the macro input. Now, one of the things you note is you now have some more information here. Do I want to group it or do I not want to group it? And the questions, so I'm going to map a field. And in this particular situation, I'm going to go ahead and map the state sales tax. All right. Let me go ahead and look at my data again. So when I'm looking at my control parameter, there's my state tax rate as a percentage. And so that's what's going to come in under my questions, right? Just like we did before. The group by is a new one, and you have the group by because you're bringing in a second set of data, right? Now, if I go ahead and run that and I don't connect anything, I've got 50 records here. I've got 500 records here. And my output has 25,000 records. So what it did is it went ahead and said, okay, I'm going to apply each of these 50 records to all of these 500 records, resulting in 25,000 records. Right? Obviously not what I'm looking for in this particular example, right? Depends upon what your needs are. Now, with the group by, I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, I am going to group, and I'm going to group by state abbreviation for my control. For my input, it also has state abbreviation. So I'm going to be mapping these to these. And now when I run it, I have 500 records. So now all the Arkansas only got matched with the tax rate for Arkansas, as opposed to Arkansas being matched with everything. So that right there kind of gives you a good idea of grouping. And you do or do not, you can or don't have to group. It's however you want to do that, whatever is pertinent for what you're trying to do. But if you have that input as well as the control parameter, you're going to have the option to group or not group. If you only have the control parameter, that option won't be there like in our first example. All right. I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys followed along, got everything. Again, like everything else, any questions at all that you have, feel free to give me a call. You guys have a nice afternoon.